Welcome back to Vintage HLC Show and Tell. Today we're looking at the Empress shape, which was introduced in 1913 and was produced to the early 1950s. So we're going to begin by comparing it to Genesee, which is its predecessor. So it's this bulbous round shape, rather simple handle. Look at the Genesee marking. Empress, on the other hand, was a little more straight-sided and had a pedestal and a tall loopy type handle. Now Genesee was not very successful. It only lasted for about 8 years. But Empress, as I said, was about mid-1950s when it was finally discontinued. It had a pretty long run. There were two markings on Empress. We no longer have those cursive names written out. Instead we have like this typeface name. I'm trying to find a good example. So we see the Homer Laughlin name, then Empress written out below. This one comes from 1920. Now in 1922, they get rid of those names in the back stamps. That affects Empress, Quaker, and Republic, and we get the more generic type Homer Laughlin marking, like this one. This comes from 24. All Empress should have a date code, because date codes were introduced in 1912, Empress was introduced in 1913. So if you find one without a date code, then it was a mistake. So one thing that makes Empress special from all the other Homer Laughlin shapes is this use of blue treatments. We've got all these blue decals with blue trim. We really don't see this on any other Homer Laughlin shape. So here's one with a willow decal and blue trim. Little medallions with blue trim. This one comes from 1923. Another blue medallion type. That one's from 1920. We just looked at that marking. A ramekin with liner. This one's dated 1917. The ramekin just has a dry foot, so it won't be marked. Little demi-tasse cup. This has the treatment that we see on this covered dish as W116. So I would assume that's for Woolworths. We see this pattern on a bunch of pickup pieces like the octagon jug. We see it on the Boston egg cup, the paneled mug, the Baltimore mug, which is a shape we've really not discussed, but this is just a generic pickup piece that was used in many lines. This one comes from 1922. This one is called Lasalle. It is treatment E8703, and it was made for Butler Brothers. Here's one with a little bolder coloring to it. That's from 1920. This one is also made for Butler Brothers. Interestingly, the treatment number on this, they just have a BB for Butler Brothers. And we've got a blue trim piece with golden casing lines. And this is called Yale. Again, made for Butler Brothers. Pretty big a customer for Homer Laughlin in the teens and 20s. This comes from 1920. It's also during the time of the early Empress pieces from the teens where Hudson is still dominant. You know, this is one reason why Niagara and Genesee never really took off, because Hudson was just such a strong selling shape. That's true for Empress, but then it sort of goes off on its own in the 20s, especially when Quaker comes along and they start to share flatware, which we'll go over that more when we look at the Quaker shape. It's a gold band treatment. It's marked with its treatment number E1602. This is one of the long-running treatments of Empress. Rather unusual one here. These black lines and squares and gold. Another treatment that's unique to Empress. Bluebirds. We see bluebird decals on several different Homer Laughlin shapes. Here it is treatment E9303. And we have the same treatment on this covered dish as a casserole. Again, the covered dish is oval. A casserole is going to be round. We also see this on the century shape. Bluebird covered sugar. Springtime, another Butler Brothers treatment. With blue trim, it's pattern E2513. With these solid gold handles, it's E6704, but it's the same decal. Empress had 3 different gravies, so you've got the regular sauce boat. You've got a gravy with no handles or a gravy fast stand. And then you've got the fast stand with the handles. Next we have some Empress jugs. Some of these are 24s jugs, are pretty standard lemonade type size. Our luster trim, so these are specialty pieces. Here's gold band. Bluebirds, yet again, they're gold trim, or blue trim, I'm sorry. But this one's unusual in that it has added gold stamps, which you don't see too often. Empress Creamer, I believe that this is a Woolworth treatment, but I'm not familiar with the treatment number offhand. This one comes from 1936. Another gold-lined Empress treatment. This one comes from 1943, so we're getting a little bit later with Empress. Our Roman Pheasant decal with luster, we see this on Knoll, Trellis, Old Roman, even Ravenna. This one comes from 1928. We saw this on Niagara in the previous video. I think it was N169. Here it is on Empress. And then we've got some solid colors. So these are marked with the Wells Art Glazes back stamp of the 1930s. So there's your melon yellow that was used in Wells, as well as oven serve. And this blue-green glaze was used on apple tree bowls. So I'm not sure who these were made for, but you will find them in these two glazes, these Empress-shaped teapots. And with these, we're looking more into the Quaker line. When we get into the 1920s, Empress and Quaker shared flatware, so they shared a lot of treatments. So you get all these band decals, like this one even has a Quaker treatment number, K3115, as does this one, K1513. So we will look at that more once we get to Quaker. This is a little specialty piece. We've got these Hudson type rose and lilac decals and gold stamps. So this was probably a second that they slapped these on just to sell it. You can see where there's a chip under the glaze. There's a lot of little kiln dirt going on the inside. Might not show up in the video, but we have all these little glaze pops in the bottom. So this is a way to use it up without having to throw it out by putting these scrap prints on there. And this one comes from 1920. So now I want to look at some treatment numbers, because in the last video, in talking about Genesee, I showed how they created a new system based on the group numbers. So they'd group things in 7 different groups, with group 0 being the least expensive treatments, which are just gold stamps, and then they increase in complexity. We got group 1, group 2, we get into decals with group 3 and group 4. Group 5, more decal borders, and then group 6 is all your leftovers. So we'll look at a piece of Genesee. We'll go back to our creamer. This is pattern number G2006. As a reminder, that doesn't mean that there's over 2,000 treatments in Genesee. What that means is we have to look at group 6. The last 2 digits tell us the group number, 06 in this case. So we go to Genesee. We see 1706, 1806. You see how they're increasing by factors of 100. Really, it's 17, 18, 19, and 20, but we're adding on these 06s at the end to signify what group we're in. So G2006, it says coin gold band, black, and fine lines with small roses. And that's what you see here. Our band with black, and then a fine line, and then our roses. So this treatment system, which originates while Genesee is in production, most, if not all, of your Empress treatments, are going to be work the same way. This is also true of Republic. So if we look at, let's say this one, that says E9205. Again, we can't assume that there are 9,200 treatments. This just tells us we need to go to group 5 and look for the 92nd such Empress treatment. So we go to group 5. Let's see if it's in this one. 9205 says pale blue and rose festoon border. And there it is, pale blue and rose festoon border. We'll look at this little tureen, and it says E5605. So we need to find the 56 Empress treatment in group 5. And we see E5605, decal border, roses festoon from black and brown border. So we have a black and brown border with those lines, and then we have the roses festoon from it. And that is treatment E5605. So it's a rather interesting system, having them encoded with these group numbers. That helps with pricing, so you know if you're working in the sales office and you want to know how to quote your customer, you can tell how elaborate the decoration was, how much work went into it, how costly the decal might have been, and you can, based on the last 2 digits, quote your customer because you know what pricing scale to use. So that's enough of the treatment numbers. I'm sure we'll see that again when we look at Republic. So I'll make a little room here. We'll look at some platters, and then we'll be done. I think I'm going to need a bigger table someday. Alright. Typical border decal on Empress. One thing you'll notice about the Empress, and consequently the Quaker platters, they get narrow and then they start to widen at the edges, and then they get narrow again. So you have like these tab extensions. This is white grapes. We see this on Hudson quite a bit. It's from 1920. This red and yellow with purple decal. We see this on Republic. So we've got these gold stamps, probably specialty pieces. You're not going to find a full set of dinnerware like this. This one's rather interesting in that it has our currant berries from Art China, but here it's on an Empress platter. So again, this is probably a factory second. In fact, we can see some glaze pops going on. So rather than use this in dinnerware, they just take an extra decal, put some gold stamps on it, and make this little specialty platter. And it comes from 1920. So it's probably a leftover print from Art China. Move these sugars. And we're going to see several of these specialty platters with these gold stamps. There's one with a rather large cherries decal. Here's our same brown and black border with rose festoon that we saw on the tureen. One of many border decals used on Empress. Here's our SR25 treatment, our pink carnation that was made for Sears. You usually see this on Hudson. We've seen it on other shapes. Here it is on an Empress platter. Bluebirds, very popular decal on Empress. Unusual purple rose. I've never seen this decal on any other piece. You see our cherries again, but on a larger size platter. This is about 17-inch platter. And finally, we have an exotic bird, again with these gold stamps going on. So that's it for Empress for now. I'm sure we will look at this again whenever we get to a Quaker video.